Welcome to Outdoor Educating on the Wealth Learning TV channel on YouTube. And this is a multi-part presentation about ideas and insights and investigations linked with outdoor educating, linked to outdoor practitioners involving educating approaches and environmental legacy. We find ourselves today sharing some really wonderful topics that are connected to those broad areas. But just before I do that and give you the overview, the agenda of today's video, I just wanted to share with you is that I'm celebrating a gift that was given to me. It's a Hawaiian shirt. And today I wore it because it's still -6 out there. It might get up to about -1, might break it to +2. We'll see what happens. I still notice there's snow on the north-facing slopes that came in a couple of days ago, and I think it's going to snow again in a couple of days. And I just thought I'd wear my Hawaiian shirt that was gifted to me as a way of celebrating, there are other places in the world that one lives. And I thought that that would be a great connection. And also, I want to celebrate out walking with the dog this morning, a beautiful pink moon that was just on the horizon on the west, and then just sort of slowly went in behind the eastern face of the Rockies. And it was just wonderful to walk and look at that moon. So just a couple of celebratory elements before we get into today's video. So I think that's a great segue into what is this broadcast about. And I'm going to start with a ceremony suggestion. I do that quite often. And then move into the 4 additional educating approaches beyond the facilitative mentoring, which there's a video link in the show more notes, and the instructive coaching, again, another video in the show more notes, so that we're going to look at training, consulting, shifting, and counseling. And with that, I'll also go over a holistic outdoor safety approach. It's be more of an introduction than anything, because I'm going to do a separate video on just digging into that and what does that all mean. But I just wanted to outline a few ideas so that you can be thinking about them for that next video. Then I'm going to share a little bit of information about the extraordinary experience characteristic transferable, and outline that for you. And then someone sent me a question, so I thought that I would answer it on this video. So with that, let's get into the ceremony. And again, if you are finding yourself wanting to chat, please do. You can send a question in through the chat function. And if you find yourself here, again, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me to move the channel up and gain more subscribers through YouTube. So I certainly appreciate that. The ceremony. What I'm going to do is share the ceremony of what is called one touch. And the idea here is, and I'll describe it through my own practice. I have a walking stick. It's a metal one that I use, but I also have my Black Diamond Willow walking stick. It's more of a ceremonial. So when I'm doing my day-to-day walks, I usually take the metal one. And what happens is when I get to the trailhead, I stop and I say hello to the trees and to the grasses and the stones. And just before I step onto the path and move forward, I figure out what kind of ceremony I'll do. And today is the one touch. And what I'm talking about is with the stick, I just reach out in front of me and I do the laying of the stick, one touch to the ground, do my hello and peace be with you statements. And then I say to myself, is there a word that will come to me today that will be of importance to my work? And if it does, I look forward to being able to hear this word in many different ways, see this word, taste, smell kind of idea, this word as it comes to me. And I want to just expand on that just a little bit more. So, the key word or keyword phrase, I could say that. So, I was walking the other day, and for some reason, the word galaxy came in. Okay. I took it for a walk with me, and lots of insights about living from the whole came to me. And it came in through a number of ways. And I have some notes here. I'm just going to read them because I think it's important to remind ourselves is to listen to the whispers and the winds. There are often whispers that you pick up. Sometimes they may come about because of the winds and the trees, but there are times I seem to hear whispers coming at me. And I listen to those and see what that says to me. What I'll do is I'll see a movement, and maybe I'm thinking or imagining the word or the word phrase, and I'll see a movement and I connect it and I attempt to figure out what's the message that's there. I might smell something that comes in from what's around me, and what is it that's happening around that word and that smell. And sometimes I'll go up and in this case with the galaxy word, I went up and asked permission of a tree. Could I get a little closer to the trunk so I can sort of feel the texture, not only on my fingers, but I just brushed it against my face to see if something else might come in. And there were a couple of insights that I thought were wonderful. And being that they're personal, I'll leave them at that point. The other thing is, if it's safe and there's a way in which to taste something around you, now you could take a little snack with you. Oh, I get that. But sometimes there's wild berries in that. But again, safety aspect to that, I would sort of remind you. Of. And again, what message arises because of the taste? So it's kind of an important way in which to get at your five senses and the notion of your multi-sense. There are other ways, the gut feelings, the intuitive that comes in. And I listen to all of them and I find ways in which to connect this one touch with my walk. And then what I do is I get to the end of the trail. What I'll do is I'll do a one touch, thank you, peace be with you, and close out the ceremony. So that's what I wanted to share with you today from a ceremony point of view. As I look at the four educating approaches that I'm going to share with you, I just would like to point out, remind you that I have a book called Help Them Help You Manage Lead, and it talks about the 9 educating approaches. I'm actually going through a rewrite of that and to update it into 11 approaches. And then I'm going to take that one and I'm actually going to rewrite it or start a series about help them help you to organize and deliver extraordinary outdoor experiences, services, and products. Now that book will be ready. I'm thinking it'll be the end of May of 2022. The other one is I'm just about finished, so I'll have that up and available. And then I was going to do another one for parents, and this could be connected to forest schools and parents and grandparents getting there's kids involved in the outdoors, and how these educating approaches are ways in which to think about how to set up the extraordinary experiences and the use of services and products. So out of those 11, I have talked about 4 already. I've mentioned those above, and they have the links to the videos. Again, just to remind you, it's training, consulting, shifting, and counseling today. And let's get started with the training one. Now, training in this case is when you want to impart a particular skill to someone for use now. Now, if you're doing a canoeing program, and I'll probably use canoeing, the J stroke, as an example throughout this video, because I think it really helps when you have that example. If you are saying, okay, you need to learn the J stroke, then you would train the person in how to do it. You could do the dry land version, then you could do while you're in the canoe, and then you could do it if you go out onto a pond just away from shore. And what you're doing is you're helping the person to learn the actual technique of the J stroke. And if you don't know what I mean by the J stroke, just type it in and search J stroke while canoeing, and you can get some pictures and videos about that. Now, this notion of the training is, in many ways, it can be considered an intervention. And maybe you have to train someone to do the J stroke better if you're on a little trip and they seem to be picking up on doing the steering of the canoe, like they see in many TV shows, and people are popping from one side to the other because they didn't learn the J stroke. And there are people, and I ask them sometimes, so how do you steer your canoe? And they say, well, I paddle this on one side, paddle a little on that side, and I go, well, so how did you learn that? I watched some TV pro. I get it. I get it. But if you actually have the ability to do the intervention and show them how to do the J stroke, it can actually get you some efficiencies in your canoeing technique. Now, the other thing about this is that it also allows you to explore teachable moments, because this notion of teach in the reach is where training fits in. And you have these teachable moments while you're canoeing to engage with the person and do it in such a way that they feel great about the learning, and then can extend this from a perspective of, okay, I can do some fine tuning of my own strokes, and you just support them and you show them, and then you let them practice. And if they're not quite doing okay, you can fine tune it. Now, what becomes important here is that if you're in groups and you are the only instructor who is doing this training update with people, be alert to when others in the group attempt to train a person in the use, let's say, of the J stroke, because sometimes they may not have it still correct, and you've got to pay attention to that. So there's a fine line between letting that happen and not letting it happen. And what I do is I watch out for and use this sort of decision structure. I say to myself, if that person's educating it correctly, let it happen, because that deepens the practice for that participant, because they are educating someone else. So it deepens their practice. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. If you find that they're doing it and you can lean in and work with both of them, then it helps out, and celebrate that the person attempted to do the educating, and move it through this fine tuning and updating what is happening. So training is really about ensuring that the skill that's needed now is shared with the person, with the group. The next one I wanted to look at is consulting. Now, this one's an interesting one, is because from an outdoor educator, outdoor practitioner, we don't think of having consultants come into our activity, but there is one time or one suggestion, there might be others, and I'll share with you here in a second. But the notion of the consultant is they have expertise in something, and they want to provide that information because you've asked them to get involved with you. Now, I think about that a lot more if you're running a business as an outdoor educator practitioner, and how to support the improvement, focus, and strengthen of your business. Now, you can do a consultant brought in, and this is where I'll share an example here. I have been asked on occasions, when I was doing a lot more of my canoeing instruction, is that someone who had just started up a business and they had gone through some of the courses with me asked me to join them for a day. And I said, what did you want me to do? And they said, can you just watch what I'm doing because of your expertise and just help out? And I said, okay, so from a consulting point of view, my scope of work in that time would be is to assist you and to do it a little bit more on the quiet. Maybe we get together off to the side while you're doing it and people are practicing, or at the conclusion of the activity. So formatively while it's folding, but not in front of your participants. And at the end, and they said, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. And I said, I can do that. And so we would set up that activity, and off we would go to be able to have that happen. So there's something that's important there from a consultant point of view. And this is the phrasing. If you're going to involve someone, whether with your business or your activity, make sure that you define the terms and concepts and then agree on those terms and concepts. So for example, if it's the J stroke, define J stroke, define how it works. What does it do while you're canoeing? And agree to that so that you know that both of you, the consultant who's supporting you and you, are clear, so that when you make your map and fulfill your plan and do your continuous evaluation, there is clarity and therefore confidence in the consultant being involved with you. Now, again, for the most part, it's usually around business, but again, I gave you an example of where it might play itself out. But the key here is just define the terms and concepts and agree on those terms and concepts. Now, the next one I wanted to share with you is shifting. Now, this is a guide on the ride side. And what it is, it's about helping a person move forward and understanding transitions and the decisions that go with that. Now, often what happens is helping a person shift. It might be about course corrections. It might be about a pivot. Let me give you an example here. The course correction is you're getting them to shift, in a sense, from that side to side of the J stroke. You've trained them and helped them understand it, but you're going to get them to fully understand that if you shift, the efficiencies are there and being able to practice it. And you might ask them to, well, why don't you educate someone else in how to do that J stroke, and work with them from that point of view and deepen their relationship. But there's a time where I was learning kayaking, and I'm a bit of a taller guy. And so the kayak that I needed to work with was not one of those really like small racing style, low to the water. It was quite high to the water. It was almost as high as like a canoe. And I was learning, and I was saying, okay, this is great. I'm learning. I was started to learn how to do the roll and sort of taking this to task, did river work and everything else. But eventually got to a point where I decided, no, this wasn't for me. I was going to go back to canoeing. So I did a shift, and I shared with the instructor, and he understood at that point in time. And I said it was really is because a lot of the rivers I'm in, because I'm a little taller and I've got a lot of space between the top of my head and where I'm sitting. When I fall over, I sometimes hit my head on the bottom of the river, on the river floor. And we had a bit of a chuckle on that. And he said, I get it. And so I did a course correction, but I actually went so far as to pivot away from kayaking, and I went back to canoeing, and I just stayed with the canoeing and then moved on to rafting and enjoyed myself from that perspective. So sometimes you have to help a person figure out, guide them to, is the activity that they're involved with one that they want to stay with? If they want to move on to something else, help them with that transition so they don't feel like, oh, geez, I must be a loser. I can't do this, right? And no, it might be as it's not enjoyable to them for some reason, and help them shift to another activity. Now, there is something here that's important, and that is, as an outdoor educator, what's the words I want to use? There is this notion of a hierarchy of values that a person holds. And it's according to those values that they undertake their be, have, do. The notion of I'll be this, I'll have this in my life, and I'll do these kind of things is according to this hierarchy of values. And if you know what your hierarchy of values are, then you can help to understand in your conversation with others what's important. And let me give you an example here. There are some people who may come to a canoeing program and they're there because of a friend or a family member. They may not actually want to do it, but because the value of being with their family, their friends, is high enough, they will actually go and learn it. And what you've got to do is you have to be able to figure out and help them is, do they continue that, or is it enough to be there on that course with them? You can help them out with that notion of shifting again as they move forward. But really, another important point here is make sure you model the way and show the enthusiasm for the activity, for what it is that you're sharing with them. That's really helpful because then they can figure out, they see what is a great approach, and then they can take a determination. Yeah, I think I'll stay with that because what they see you do is, oh, I think I'm going to actually shift. But you've made the experience so great, I'm okay to make that shift. So the next one I want to look at is counseling. Now, this one's an interesting one because there is what I call the line, and you do not step over it unless you have a license or you have a certification that allows you to cross that line. And the line that I'm talking about is when you start making suggestions to someone about what they can do to possibly overcome a depression, or they find themselves in a bit of a hole and they don't know what to do. You've got to be really careful that you don't start saying to them, well, this is what I would suggest you do. Because if you're not licensed, you don't have the certification to do that. Do not go down that pathway because it may come back to haunt you as an outdoor educator. So you can empathize with your participants and listen and show that you care, but do not share actionable outcomes that a person takes up and then they find themselves in difficulty later by doing that, because it's not on your shoulders to identify, well, you seem to be depressed, so why don't you go do this? No, what you do is you say, oh, things seem to be happening for you. Want to share a little bit about what's going on, and just empathize with them, but don't get into actionable suggestions afterwards. So in a sense, what you're doing is you're helping the person to reflect in and on maybe an issue that's there, and just be someone there to have a conversation and move through. And sometimes your presence, just being able to listen, can be very helpful. But it's what you say upon what that person is sharing with you. And even if they ask, what would you do next? Be really alert to what you say, because what you say at that important time is what you say at that point is really important to the well-being of the person that you're interacting with. So again, just remind you, don't start suggesting the next steps. If anything, you can say, why don't you talk to a licensed practitioner, someone who has certification in the area that you're working with, so you can dive a little bit deeper with them. But let's continue with the activity and enjoying ourselves today. Again, thinking about it, feeling it through so that it becomes really important to you. So those are some insights for you. Often, as an outdoor educator, the instructive coaching, the facilitative mentoring training are ones that you pick up on. The other ones might be something that you would involve others to come with you. And again, there are outdoor therapists, adventure therapists, who might go, well, I can do that. Okay, then maybe you have friends and it's something that you look at for the activity you're doing. But again, be really, let me use the word, discern what approach you're going to use, and are you near any lines that could get you into difficulty? That's the point that I'm getting to. So I think there's a great point here to segue into something called the holistic safety approach. And this is a primer. I'm just going to acknowledge that this is a primer. And this notion of psychological safety is actually something that is growing in awareness in all kinds of workplaces and activities, especially in the outdoors, is because sometimes people are coming to the outdoors and getting involved to give themselves a bit of a break from what's happening in their actual paid or volunteer workplace where they work and volunteer. And so this notion of the psychological safety comes back to the notion of the mental aspect. But before I do go into the mental aspect, I just want to remind you, which might seem obvious, I guess, but really I don't want to just assume, is that there's the physical safety of the activities and what you set up and what you are presenting to people. That's another story in and of itself. There's a little bit that follows, but I'll probably do a video and maybe even see if I can invite someone in and we can have a conversation about this notion of the physical safety aspect of some activities. Let me pick up first on the psychological safety and looking at it holistically. In other words, looking at it from a whole. Now, the mental thinking aspect is that we pull in data and information as there is the mental feeling emotional aspect. And those two components are helpful to us. So when you're educating someone in how to do the J stroke, there's a bit of data information that's coming in, but it's sometimes how you talk about it, their past experience. There might be a feeling of frustration. I've attempted this before. So again, you pick up on the psychological safety of that person, maybe through their body language or the words that they're using, and to be able to connect with them mentally, to be able to support them in the tools and techniques of the educating approaches that you're using. So to make that obvious to you. Now, there's a couple of other things that are very helpful here, and I think it's this notion of uh, the variables that would influence this notion of psychological safety. So there's the psychological safety that the person brings to the activity, to the educating place where you are and you interact with them. And how are they feeling that day? What are they thinking? How do they present themselves? I've gone so far as that when I found someone on a rafting trip, and it was a 2-day rafting trip, and they had consumed a little bit too much alcohol the night before, and they were still hungover. There have been times when I've said that the person couldn't go in the raft, and yes, we had a bit of a dialogue, but they understood where I was coming from, and what we did was we met them halfway down on day 2. They were in much better shape, and then I let them into the raft, and they thanked me again at the end of the day because they saw this notion of the safety aspect that I was attempting to get to. So the notion of self, which then says, okay, from you as an educator, what is your situation? How are you fitting into this? And there was one trip where I actually had to put an educator to the side and couldn't go because the educator got a little carried away on that 2-day trip and had drunk a little bit too much. What I had to do was swap out that person with someone else that was available on the trip in the support function, and it worked out all right. And again, the person thanked me afterwards and said, I learned a very valuable lesson. So you as the educator, the educators that are with you, that's another variable. Another one is the activity itself. What are you doing? And I'm going to make another point here a little bit later, and it's actually to the question that someone asked me. So I'll touch on that later. There is what's the group and how the group is interacting, and There are times where there's people in the group who want to push forward and let's go, 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 go. And others are, oh, I'm just learning about what's going on. Again, the group dynamics that you have is another variable. The situation in which you find yourself in that immediate situation, maybe it's the starting of the trip, it's along the trip, it's near the end of the trip, it's at the end of the trip, that situation. But there's also the environmental, the whole aspect. There was one rafting trip where we started off in sun, went to rain, went to hail, and the hail got so big that I had to turn the raft over when we went to shore to protect the people who were with me. We got off and we got started, and it turned into a rain again, then into sun, and the temperatures warmed up about 15 minutes before we hit the end. But the amazing thing was that it was a group of, what was it, 6 adults. They were from another country. They were from a country in Europe, and they were a little bit older. And they came up to me afterwards and gave me a big hug. And they said, that was the best experience they've ever had. And they said, even underneath the raft and it's hailing? Yes, because it's how we experience the full trip. And I just, okay. But I know on the trip, I was saying to myself, get me off the river. It's time to close this up. But they thought it was the best thing that they've ever experienced. So again, the environment, the situation, the group, and all of that unfolding, that was a wonderful day. So that is some examples for you. Now, let's give it a little bit of action. What are some things that you can do to deal with this holistic safety approach? And again, thinking about it from the whole. One of the places to start is, what are you attending to? And if you're the educator, the practitioner, what are you seeing happening? What's in front of you? What are you attending to? Not thinking about, well, what happened yesterday? No, you're attending to the situation, the environment, the group, the participants. You are taking into consideration. You're attending to it. You're listening for things. What words might people be sharing? Do you hear hesitation or things about maybe someone's not getting along well with someone else? They're in a relationship, a family comes, all right? What are people sharing about? Where they've come from? Have they been in an activity like this before? What's the notion of the caring because of? And maybe you've heard a story of, well, I went and did this before, but it wasn't a great experience. And you're going, okay, what do I have to do to care for that person in relationship to everyone else? Again, thinking it through, caring because of. And the notion of moving through. How do I move everyone through and into the activity to learn what they want to learn and just keep them moving forward, and without sort of putting pressure on someone, and still dealing with those who want to move a little faster, those who want to move a little bit slower. How do you guide them in moving forward? So there's 3 things I would summarize here, and out of that, attending to, listening for, sharing about, caring because, and moving through. And it's about this notion of the preparation approach that you are going to take up. And you notice it's preparation approach, not preparation avoidance. From a safety point of view, there are people who prepare for the trip and they use an avoidance. They're going to thinking about all what's going to hinder them. Personally, I use a preparation approach. What are all the things that are going to help me, so that if I do find myself in something that's hindering and I've got to deal with it, I have this other way of looking at it from an approach point of view, and finding ways to deal with the helps to deal with the hinders. So it's called a preparation approach. The other one is a prevention backpack, metaphorically in a sense, but I can give it to you in the sense of if you're actually hiking. And from a wilderness remote first aid point of view, I shared with participants, whatever you carry in your backpack, it must have at least 3 uses. Its primary use and at least 2 other uses that can be linked to survival and first aid. So someone brings a plastic bag with cookies. Yes, they're to keep the cookies, but what else could you use the plastic bag for? One could be to gather water, safely gather water. Maybe there is an amputation to a finger, toe, something. You could put it in the bag and pack it in ice. So that's just off the top of my head. These are things that I talked about when we were learning about wilderness remote first aid. And then the third one in this series here is practice continuance. The more that you practice what it is that you're learning, you as an educator and then you encouraging your participants, is to continue to practice. There are times where people learn about hiking and then they may not go out and do hiking to the next year, and then they just, oh, okay, I got my boots, slip them on, and off they go. And not remembering is, oh, hang on a minute, are my the back of my heels ready for the rubbing? Have I done any preparatory work? Have I done any loosening up? They may have forgotten that and they just think, oh, yeah, well, last year I just went for a hike with a couple of people, so we'll just take off. There's a practice continuance is to make sure that the activity that you're going to do is still going to be done safely, holistically. Safety is primary here. So again, continue to practice. And often you learn different tools and techniques. And again, wilderness remote, the outdoor educator sharing it, the wilderness remote first aid instructor sharing about, like the four categories of poisons. But if you don't keep it fresh in your mind, okay, before you go out on the trip, okay, what might be the ways I may get poisoned today? And you think it through so that you have got this approach ready in case something happens. And I'll use jellyfish, for example. I always used to say, just because you've gone to the beach, it doesn't mean that the next time you go to the beach, there isn't a jellyfish there. And if you're not paying attention to the animals and wildlife that are around you, you might inadvertently step on or get too close to, and now you've got a poisoning, even though you know when you enter into certain saltwater situations, pay attention to what's around you. So again, I bring that to your foreground conversations. Now, one of the other things that I've been doing is I've been sharing about extraordinary experience triggers and prompts linked to characteristics of delivering extraordinary experiences. And I want to pick up on transferable. But before I do that, I just want to remind you about trigger and prompt and reflection. Trigger is really this notion of a mental spark. Something gets triggered, you go, oh, okay. And it comes to your awareness, and there gets prompt with, sometimes, more often than not, there's an emotion that's associated with. Now, the emotion could be a hinder emotion. I'm angry, I'm scared, or it could be, oh, this is joyful, I get to do it again. So the notion of the trigger becomes this idea of a mental spark that drives you forward in your involvement. It prompts an emotional connection. And then there's a reflection about, oh, do I do that or don't I do it? And decisions get made about, do I continue down this path, or, oh, I better do a little bit of a course correction, as I've mentioned earlier. So again, that's why there's this notion of triggers, prompts, and reflections, and they happen very quickly. But I wanted to do it through the lens of transferable. Now, this notion of transferable means that the activity is interchangeable, it can be assigned, it's negotiable, all right? The idea is, if I've gone through it, what else might I draw from it? And I'll go into my outdoor days of doing training and development for teams. And this was a really important one, is that if you went through an activity like I did, I set up activities with whitewater rafting. How do I transfer this activity of us guiding the raft about leadership back in the workplace? And so I would help people through this transferable characteristic of the extraordinary experience. And this one is where you want to pay attention to debriefing in and debriefing out of. So the debriefing is you're translating into their words, having gone through experience, you're going to interpret in their words through debriefing and bringing it back out of that experience to find out how it can be used in a wider sense. Now, again, it could be, how do I use it for if I do that activity again? Maybe you're on a multiple day trip and you want to make sure that people continue to do the J stroke that I mentioned. So herein is the notion of the trigger. Maybe what you do is you push or pull too much. You overload the person with ideas and insights, and you're thinking it's going to be helpful because you want to get them with you and understanding what's going on. I think of it as, okay, maybe there's 5 or 6 steps to a J stroke, and what you do is you give them all, but the person forgot number 1. So maybe you want to give the first couple, then the next couple, and then the next couple, because it would create a mental spark in the person that might bring up, geez, I don't think I can ever get this, or a reminder that it really works. All right. But you don't want to confuse the person, right, from an emotional point of view, because that might prompt them to think that they're not competent, and they won't be competent, and they turn away from the activity of the usefulness of J stroke and go back to that wasted time energy one of going from side to side. So again, trigger, you're giving them too much. The prompt emotionally is, are they going to stay with it, or are they going to move away from it? And the reflection for themselves is, yeah, I continue to do this, but from your reflection perspective as an outdoor educator practitioner is, am I giving too much? Am I hindering or helping? What can I do to figure out ways in which to get the specific actions to the person while I'm doing the training? And how do I speak to them so I don't cross any lines, like into counseling? This notion of being alert to the educating approach is being alert to the activities that you're using, and using this notion of trigger prompt reflection around this characteristic of transferable. Because the great thing is that most activities and education that happens in the outdoors is transferable into all aspects of life, and that's why I so enjoy being able to bring those connections to someone. So I'm hoping that has helped you to take a look at this notion of training and consulting, shifting, and counseling. You've looked at it through a lens of holistic safety. And again, remember, it's a primer. And how does that holistic psychological safety fit into those educating approaches? And then this notion of being transferable. Again, in and of itself, it's of use, but if you link it back through the holistic psychological safety, back through the educating approaches, and take some time to just do that reflection in and on, you can start to see how you deepen your practice, how you improve focus and strengthen your practice. But there was a question asked of me, and it links back to a point that I made earlier. And I thought it was a great question. And I thought maybe I had mentioned it before, but the person had shared it through an email to me. And they said, and I'm going to read it verbatim. They said, reading and watching your videos and notes, you mentioned without participants' feet leaving the ground. What do you mean by that? And I had a little bit of a chuckle because, yes, my work is with those who are outdoor educators, practitioners, and the person's feet stay on the ground. In other words, their feet don't go from the ground into a canoe that's on the water, or into a raft that's on the water. Their feet don't go onto a rock face, and they're learning to climb rock faces and maybe getting used to climbing mountains. Or someone's feet gets up onto the pedals of a four-wheeler, and off they go. And I make this distinction because often, if you're looking for insurance, the insurance moves into a higher bracket when your feet leave the ground. That was one of the ways that it was best explained to me. And therefore, I've maintained that in my own work now, is that I'm interacting with people whose participants' feet are not moving the ground. Also, it from a risk situation, it helps you to figure out what kind of risks associated with it. Because if you're just doing walking, then the risk might be is, are they getting tired? They clip their foot and maybe sprain an ankle. So you think through, okay, where am I on the given day? But when you move on to a rock face or you're canoeing, the variables increase in terms of the situation, the environment, the group dynamics, the person's interaction with it. And that's why the notion of risk and insurance goes up. And that's my answer to that question. And again, I take you back to the preparation approach, the prevention backpack that you carry with you, right? And that includes, all of your lived experience and the procedures that you have in your business and the certification and what you know about doing things like wilderness remote first aid, these kind of activities that are put in there, but not to the point that you've loaded yourself down that backpack becomes too heavy to carry. You have to find a way in which to balance the weight of that for the educating you're doing and the practice that you're sharing. And again, not to forget about the practice continuances. Keep reflecting on your practice, improve, focus, and strengthen it, and keep doing it, being continuance, and that will help you. And that's why I come back to those three key pieces. And that's why I don't work with people whose participants' feet leave the ground. I can do it, I can have conversations, but I always make sure that they're clear that what I'm sharing is from a general point of view and that they have to make it much more specific, accurate for their situation, and help them understand it from in that way. So I think that's going to bring us to a close for this video, for this live broadcast. And I thank you for staying with me. Again, please subscribe to the channel. It helps to move me through the algorithm. Again, comment. Did I say something that was incorrect? Or, hey, that was a great idea. I just want to take it up on it. Or ask me a question and I can answer it on another video. Maybe I can answer it in the comment section right there. So I look forward to interacting with you again on a Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Mountain. There'll be another video. And next week, for sure, I'm going to go over the educating approach of celebrant and what does that mean around celebration. We'll do another extraordinary experience characteristic, and there will be another ceremony. And I think what I'll do the two touches ceremony and explain what that one's about. So with that, always enjoy your outdoor adventures, activities, and do so in all the ways that are possible. And with that, take care.